All right, it looks like we are live.
All right, if everyone's ready, I can give my opening statement. We can get right into it.
Okay, go right ahead.
All right. My name is Christopher Bess. I'll be moderating this debate this evening. First and foremost, I feel privileged to get to moderate today. I've had the pleasure of debating both of these debaters in some limited capacity, and I must say that they are two of the most talented debaters I know. And that said, today they'll be debating whether or not the United States should abolish the Electoral College. On the pro side, we have David P. Neff, and on the con side, we have Dr. Marc Pollock. And this debate will be done in the traditional Lincoln Douglas debate format, which is as follows. First, a 6-minute constructive from pro, followed by a 3-minute cross-examination by con. Next, con will have 7 minutes to give their own constructive and some initial rebuttals, followed by a 3-minute cross-examination by pro. Pro will then have 4 minutes to rebut and defend, followed by a 6-minute rebuttal defense by con, and then pro finally closes the debate with a 3-minute speech. After each round, we will have a 60-second break unless waived by the speaker. Additionally, each debater will have 4 minutes of prep time to use as they see fit, given that they do not interrupt an ongoing speech or cross-examination. As far as my moderation paradigms go, all content is fair game, except for ad hominem attacks, obviously. For timing, debaters may go over time a few seconds just to finish whatever thought they were having at the time. I will intervene, though, if it gets excessive. Each debater may keep their own time, but in the event that their recorded time conflicts with my time will supersede theirs. Yeah, that's all the formalities. Now that that's out of the way, we can begin with David's opening speech.
Well, thank you, Christopher, so much for taking your time out of your day to moderate, and thank you, Dr. Pollock, for being willing to debate with me. So in this debate, I would like to hold the value of democracy. Democracy is defined by the Merriam-Webster Dictionary as a government in which the supreme power is vested in the people and exercised by them directly or indirectly through a system of representation, usually involving periodically held free elections. The criteria for which I weigh this value is the principle of universal suffrage of the citizens. Each citizen should be given an equal say in the presidential election. This is commonly called one person, one vote. Consider the following quotes. The governments are instituted among men, deriving their just power from the consent of the governed, from the Declaration of Independence. And the will of the people shall be the basis for the authority of the government. This will shall be expressed in periodic and genuine elections by which universal and equal suffrage shall be held by a secret vote or by equivalent free voting procedures by the UN Declaration of Human Rights. So my plan is that all American citizens who are 18 years of age or older should be able to vote in the election. This would also enable the citizens of Puerto Rico and other U.S. territories to have a say in the presidential election. So contention number one is that the Electoral College is more susceptible to fraud than the popular vote. The Electoral College is more susceptible because a handful of fraudulent votes in a few key swing states could radically change the outcome of the presidential election. In 2000, George W. Bush won Florida by less than 600 votes. What if a few of those votes were fraudulent on either side? If that was the case, then Bush could have won through fraud. However, if we were to use the popular vote, then Al Gore would have won by several 100,000 votes, no problem whatsoever. And in the 2020 election, Trump claimed that the election was rigged and that the votes were fraudulent. Even if a significant amount of votes were fraudulent in a few key swing states, Joe Biden would still be the very clear winner of the popular vote. Contention number two, the Electoral College harms national security. In the 2000 election, it was decided by the Supreme Court more than a month after the presidential election. This delay caused a significant delay in appointing key positions to national security. After 9/11, the 9/11 Commission found that as much as possible, the disruption of national security policymaking during the change of administrations is accelerated by the process for national security appointments. It is recommended to be a seamless transition to allow the possibility of successors even before the election to, quote, submit the names of selected members of their prospective transition team to the FBI so that, if necessary, those team members can obtain security clearances immediately after the election is over. And it is also recommended that immediately after the election, the president-elect should be allowed to begin their process of obtaining national security clearances for his national security picks so that their background investigations can be complete before January 20th. And finally, it notes, the outgoing administration should provide the president-elect as soon as possible after Election Day with a classified compartment list that catalogs specific operational threats to national security, etc. Contention number 2 is that the Electoral College, contention number 3, that the Electoral College undermines democracy. 5 times throughout history, the Electoral College went against the direct popular vote, the most recent being in 2016, where Donald Trump won, despite losing the popular vote by more than 2.8 million votes. Furthermore, the percentage that is won in the Electoral College is often far greater than the actual popular vote. For example, in 2012, President Obama was reelected. Although he won 51% of the popular vote, he received 60% of the Electoral College vote. This creates an interesting paradox. You could theoretically win the presidency with only 23% of the popular vote in only 12 states. The Electoral for College further violates the one man, one vote principle by making certain states worth more than other states. An individual vote in Wyoming counts nearly 4 times more in the Electoral College than in Texas, because Wyoming has 3 Electoral College votes and a population of 532,668 citizens, and Texas elects 32 electoral votes for a population of almost 25 million. As Fair Vote notes, quote, by dividing the population by electoral votes, we can clearly see that Wyoming has 1 elector for every 177,556 people, and Texas has 1 elector for about every 715,499. The difference between these 2 states of 537,943 is the largest in the Electoral College. And my final subpoint is that the Electoral College lowers voter turnout. If you're a Republican in a deep blue state, your vote simply does not count. States like California and New York will almost always vote Democrat, so voting Republican will make absolutely no difference. Your voice is effectively silenced by the majority of the voters in that state. Similarly, if you are a Democrat in a ruby red North Dakota, your vote also does not make any difference at all in the grand scheme of things. Replacing the Electoral College with a direct national vote will help to increase that turnout. Taylor, I can't pronounce the last name right. Imagine Barack Obama speaking to crowds in Dallas or Mitt Romney campaigning in New York City. At the very least, it might engage more people in the national debate if we ever hope to breach the 60% voter turnout threshold last seen in 1960. The last 2 elections have reduced around 57%. This, of course, was before the 2020 election, which broke the 60% threshold. This is one way to do so. The lawsuit states, the lawsuits that emerged in the fallout of the 2000 election will be less likely to reappear. When one state decides an election, it behooves all sides to fight for those electoral votes. And the popular vote decided the winner, I doubt we'd see such fallout again. And in the 2016 election, swing states had a significantly higher vote out than solid blue or solid red states. How much time do I have left?
That is a good question because I actually forgot to start the time, so I was just hoping that you were recording it as you
Okay.
went.
Okay. Well, in that case, I'm just gonna stop right here just to make sure I can deliver.
Okay. Yeah, because it seemed like you were getting pretty close to that time.
I
Marc,
think
were
it
you
was pretty
taking time on
close.
that?
I started mine a little late.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, I apologize for that.
All right.
right.
So with that,
All right.
So good.
Now that that's over with, you guys can go ahead and start cross-ex unless you want to take that 60-second break.
I'm good to just go in.
all right.
All right. In that case, we're starting now. You guys have 3 minutes.
Okay. So you mentioned the value of democracy. Why is that the most important value in a country that primarily prides itself on being a republic?
Well, because a republic is simply a form of democracy. Saying that we're a republic but not a democracy is like saying I'm a pianist but not a musician. A republic is simply a type of democracy, and any form of democracy, whether it be a republic, a direct democracy, or a parliamentary democracy or congressional democracy, there needs to be an equal say among citizens.
So you admit we're not an absolute democracy.
I'm sorry?
You admit we're not an absolute democracy.
Of course, no country is an absolute democracy.
So why not be an absolute democracy then? Why not just take republic out of the equation and go full democracy?
Well, we could very well do that so far. But that being said, we're too large of a country, and we have far too many differences in the country for an absolute democracy to work.
Do you think that everyone having the same vote provides everyone the same access to decision-making apparatus? Say someone voting in Wisconsin who only represents one person is going to have the same clout as someone who lives in Los Angeles, California?
Oh yeah, and absolutely.
Even though the candidate is not likely to visit them if they're in Wisconsin.
Well, I mean, in the 2020 election, many of the people visited Wisconsin over California because Wisconsin was quote unquote a swing state and not California. So the way that the Electoral College is set up is that the presidential candidates kind of ignore the solid blue states or the solid red states and focus on the quote unquote swing states.
Okay. You mentioned that the Electoral College can harm national security because of the willingness of a president to give that information to their potential successor. Isn't that a unique situation we're encountering with this particular president and not something that goes beyond that application?
Well, the fact remains that the fact that this actually has happened in more than one occasion, 1800 as well being decided by Congress, and 2000 being decided by the Supreme Court. The fact of the matter is any form of delay can significantly harm national security. And the fact that that possibility remains is a good reason to overturn the Electoral College completely and replace it with a direct vote. In fact, in the 1800 election, some of the founding fathers who
That's 3 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's time. I was going to let you finish that sentence if you wanted.
Yeah, so basically, last closing parts is that some of the founding fathers who designed the Electoral College were wanting to replace it. So, yeah, I'm ready for your opening statement.
Okay.
All right. Yeah, if you want to take the 60 seconds, go ahead. If not, you
No,
can.
I'll just launch in, I think.
All right.
So first off, thanks to both David and Chris for being here. I really appreciate the opportunity to debate this. It's the first time I've debated this topic and the first time I'm doing Lincoln Douglas style debate. So I appreciate both opportunities. So because our presidential elections must not diminish the voices of smaller states or minorities, and because we cannot further risk damaging trust in our electoral system, I negate the resolution. The United States should abolish the Electoral College. So I'm saying it should not. I do this under a value of equitable representation. What I mean by equitable and not equal is the idea of ensuring that each group gets access to a presidency and elected officials that would be interested in them. So what I mean by that is each state has a voice in the election, and not just each individual, but each state. So each state must have access to those individuals and must be worthy of being visited and cared about. And the criteria for that is rejection of tyranny of the majority. We need to reject a system that tries to push out those smaller voices on the basis that some larger states and some larger cities should take control of the conversation during an election. So my first disadvantage is the logistical nightmare. So part of the benefit of having an electoral college is that we get to take the election out of the hands of the person being elected and put that into the power of the states. They might not make good choices in every case, but they don't have the personal stake that a sitting president does, and the ability to manipulate the outcome would require monkeying from a bunch of different electoral processes rather than just one. You also have to know in advance which states are going to be close enough that your efforts are going to pay dividends. Otherwise, it's pointless to take those kinds of actions. Yet what Pro is suggesting is a uniform system, something that would require a federal policy. All states have to act in this specific manner. They all have to go through the same electoral system. Effectively, Pro is putting incumbent presidents in charge of their own re-election. And none of this even mentions what recounts would look like. Pro's world basically puts every state on notice. If an election is at all close across the whole country, they will all have to recount every vote in a chaotic nationwide recount that is likely to only divide the public more, as recounts in just a handful of states did this year. So the lesson from Florida in 2000 is that the Electoral College has the great merit of confining such election conflicts to just one state, or a few, as it was the case in 1876. Now, containing elections within state lines also means containing election problems. The Electoral College turns the states into the equivalent of watertight compartments on an ocean liner. Fraud or process failures can be isolated in the state where they occur and need not become national crises. Now, close elections would make a national nightmare instead of challenges in just one or two states. The parties and the media would find it difficult to monitor recounts and litigation across the country. Unlike tallies in other nations, these counts are largely conducted by partisan officials, something not likely to inspire trust. And that trust isn't just a matter of partisanship or close elections. The national popular vote would maximize the rewards of voter fraud in those metropolitan areas. Under the Electoral College, an illegal vote only affects the outcome in one state. Under popular vote compact, an illegal vote would affect the national outcome. This is important not just because it's known that voter fraud exists and is affected by influences such as hacking voting machines, but because the perception of vulnerability, the concerns regarding the veracity of our elections, is essential to keep in check. Democracies only work when people believe that the elected official actually won. A system that affords greater gains to those who would seek to subvert an election is not going to ease their worries. A second disadvantage is tyranny of the majority. Only large states and majority groups matter under pro systems. So I'm going to start with the story that might surprise everybody. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, civil rights leaders came out enthusiastically in favor of the Electoral College. Senators asked what it would do to rural and urban communities, small states and large, minority populations in the two-party system. And in the final vote in the Senate in 1979, it was defeated by a coalition of Northern liberals and Southern conservatives, and this was a specific policy aimed at doing what David is talking about here. Now, this is no token gesture of support. They wrote editorials, they testified before Congress. In general, they seemed terrified that if the Electoral College were to go away, racial minorities would be harmed. In fact, National Urban League President Vernon Jordan defended the Electoral College, saying, "Take away the Electoral College and the importance of that black vote melts away. Blacks, instead of being crucial to victory in major states, become 10% of the total electorate with reduced impact." What people would get by choosing direct election is the disintegration of the state-based two-party system, the rise of numerous factional parties based on race, region, class, ideology, or cult of personality, radical public opinion, frequent runoff elections, widespread electoral fraud, and centralized control of the electoral process, and ultimately, unstable national government that veers between incompetence and tyrannical caprice. So why would this happen? In a multi-candidate race, the largest national popular vote could be obtained by a regional candidate with just 35 or 40% of the popular vote. Under such an arrangement, presidential candidates would have no incentive to campaign anywhere else except major media markets in a few states. The country would, in essence, cede our presidential elections to the largest metropolitan areas whose concerns are different from those in other areas of the country. We are not the only country to convey greater voting impact to less populated regions. The UK does it in parliamentary elections. New Zealand, Japan, India, Australia, Canada, all these systems would have to be fundamentally flawed under Pro's view. Small states need a voice, just as small minorities in the larger population need a voice, and for a similar reason. Their interests are distinct from those of larger states and must be recognized. Even in the US, we recognize the importance of giving these states an outsized vote through the Senate and House. Why do we do this? This has encouraged presidential candidates to build coalitions. You can't win if you're catering to one region or one type of voter or one special interest group. Those who do the best in the Electoral College have done the best job with coalition building. Historically, those who do a terrible job fail. The Electoral College is the reason we clawed our way back from the Civil War, where the country is more divided than ever because Democrats and Republicans needed to reach out to different constituencies to take that election.
All right, that's about time, isn't it?
Yes.
All right. In that case, we'll be starting the next cross-examination session, unless you guys want to take that 60-second break.
Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, David's muted.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize I was muted. Yeah, I'll take a 60-second break. That would be a good idea.
All right, starting time now. All right, that was 60 seconds.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you, Christopher. And let's start with the your first contention being equal representation. Under the Electoral College system, the vast majority of over 90% of campaign events are held in a handful of swing states. Do you think that it violates the principle of having everyone have access to the candidates?
It's not a perfect system, but neither is yours, because all that would do is change the states in which it occurs.
Okay, and which states would that occur in?
California, New York, Texas, places with large population centers, especially large cities.
Okay, how many people voted in the 2020 election?
I can't say off the top of my head.
Okay, and just give me a number. Of the people who actually voted, it was over 155 million. How many votes came from California?
Again, I don't know population dynamics.
All right, that's fine. As it turns out, California, the entire popular vote from California only made up 0.11% of the entire popular vote. New York, 0.05 of the electoral vote, and Texas, 0.07% of the electoral vote. So if you're a presidential candidate and you're putting all your eggs in California, New York, Texas, which makes up less than 3% of the popular votes, what do you think is going to happen to that candidate?
They'll probably win, because honestly, the entire premise is flawed. They can't spend all their time in every state. They have to be able to focus their attention on a few key markets. And so in this case, you're just changing which market they're spending their time in.
Right, but that happens now.
Then why is your system better? You're the one advocating for change.
My system is better because it would force candidates to reach out to voters in other states. And let's see here. The Electoral College, would you agree that the Electoral College encourages presidential candidates to pay most attention to people in Ohio, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and ignore people in states like Kansas, Alabama, etc.?
I would say that a lot of the larger states already have an outsized influence on elections based on their financial contributions in a lot of cases. Having those attentions placed on smaller states is better than having to force more attention on the larger states.
Okay, and why would that be the case? Because in the that's kind of why we have the Senate, correct? Because these small states are far more powerful in the Senate than the big states of
The
New York.
Senate can't pass executive orders. The Senate doesn't have a cabinet of officials. The Senate doesn't nominate Supreme Court candidates. There's lots of things the Senate can't do that the president does.
Right, but the Senate is needed to confirm the people to the justices. The Senate is needed.
Important at that balance, but you need the power to be available to states individually for the executive branch too.
Okay, let's see here. How much?
Excuse me, is that time?
Yeah, I don't know.
That's right.
Yeah, that's probably time.
All right.
Let's see here.
All right.
Uh,
In that case, Well, you guys, you'll have like 60 seconds if you want, or you can take prep time in order to prepare for
Okay,
your
how
rebuttal and
much
your
time is my
defense.
rebuttal?
Your rebuttal
Rebuttal
is
is
4
4
minutes.
minutes. All right, I'm going to take,
Yeah.
give me 2 minutes to prepare.
All right. All right. That's 2 minutes.
All right, thank you very much. Once again, thank you, Christopher, for moderating, and thank you, Dr. Pollock, for debating this with me. So if we were to just kind of summarize my main arguments one more time, my value is democracy, and my value is one person, one vote. In my opening speech, I noted that the Electoral College harms U.S. Security by causing significant delays in 9/11, and Dr. Pollock, I believe he dropped that. I don't think he responded to that at all. So please extend that across the board. Next, let's talk about the issue of equal representation. This point is refuted by the simple fact that the vast majority of candidates spend so much time in one or two states and not a lot in other states as well. Yeah, 2/3 of campaign events were held in 2016. Only 2/3 of excuse me, sorry, 2/3 of campaign events in 2016 were held in 6 battleground states, and 91% of them were held in those states plus Arizona. So only 9% of events were held in the other 38 states. So again, California, New York, Texas all make up, and the grand scheme of things, less than 4% of the entire popular votes. If you're a presidential candidate, you're going to need to reach out to much more than those 4%. You're going to need to build coalitions and all across the country. You're going to need to reach out to people. And if I'm a Democratic candidate, I'm going to have to reach out to swing voters in states like Wyoming, Alabama, Kansas, North Dakota. I'm going to have to reach out to them and hear their needs. If I want to be president, I can't focus on just 4% of the less than 4% of the entire electorate. And let's see here, pulling up my notes. So yeah, presidential candidates would be forced to visit and acknowledge the issues of the other 38 states. And actually, this creates another problem. If you're up for re-election, you would only want to make sure if you're at the Electoral College, if I'm running for re-election, I would want to make sure that my policies don't piss off the quote unquote swing states. As if I am a president and Ohio, Wisconsin, etc., are against one policy, well, if I pass that policy, I might lose the re-election. And So again, the Electoral College system encourages the president to pay attention to only the interest votes in those swing states. Next, he talks about the logistical nightmare. Again, this happens in a lot of states by itself, and generally, when that happens, they only recount in the counties that actually make a difference. So, for example, if there was an irregularity or a question of recount in, say, Florida, they would focus on Florida and not the entire population as a whole. And again, this is evidenced by the fact that this happens all the time throughout the elections. Next, let's talk about the rise of factional parties and runoff elections. I actually think that would be a good thing to have more parties. I think the two-party duopoly has greatly harmed our country. I would love to see more libertarians and Greens in office. People like Justin Amash, the libertarian, would be great. And as far as
That was about
okay,
4 minutes. You can
yeah,
finish that
and
sentence if you
runoff
want.
elections would also be great because these happen and such as Georgia. Runoff elections are actually good because it requires the candidate to have a majority of the votes.
All right. Well, that concludes his rebuttal speech. We have like 60 seconds. If you want to prepare Marc for your next rebuttal, you'll have 6 minutes to give that speech.
Yeah, so how long do I have to prepare?
You have a minute. You can take whatever prep time.
Okay.
You still have all 4 minutes of your prep time.
Okay, I'm going to take, I'll tell you when I'm going to stop.
Okay.
All right, I'm ready to go.
All right. That was 2 minutes and 20 seconds. All right, you have 6 minutes to give your rebuttal.
Okay. So thanks to everyone once again. I think what this debate largely comes down to is a question of what it means for individuals to have a single vote as their voice and for states to be represented or not represented and whether that occurs. So going through some of Pro's case, he talks about this value of democracy. I think he fundamentally misunderstands how we function as a country. Much as we do have voting, we are not fundamentally a democracy. At our most fundamental, we are a republic. We're representative. We elect representatives who do everything that we need them to do. So they're meant to represent our votes and take action in our stead. That's what states are meant to do too. That's the reason why we have electoral votes, because they functionally represent our votes. So he's taking the representative out of democracy and claiming that democracy is the most important thing, when in reality, all of our votes are represented by representatives. And so fundamentally, his value of democracy just isn't that important, especially when you're talking about equitable representation. One vote, one person is not equitable representation because not everyone cares about the same vote coming from Wisconsin versus one coming from New York. The one in New York is going to get a lot more presidential visits because there's a lot more people there to get them. You get more people in your camp that are watching you talk about your policies. You're not going to go out to the middle of nowhere, Wisconsin, to do the same thing. And that's where the problem lies. That's why they need those electoral votes, to make sure that their opinion is represented. So he talks about how citizens should be given equal say. I would say that what he's doing is by pushing for equality, he's denying equity. By pushing for equality, he's denying the opportunity for these people to be heard, and he's functionally misrepresenting the entire point that I was making about minority rights, because the rights of minorities, not just states, but also racial minorities, religious minorities, all other minorities, are dramatically impacted by not having this electoral system in place. Now, he talks about how it's susceptible to voter fraud. I've already talked about how voter fraud is extremely likely under a system where there's every single vote counts towards the national number. And so how there's more of a push for that to happen. So the degree of harm caused by fraud is far worse, and people are much less likely to trust that system. He talks about how the Electoral College harms national security by delaying appointments. This really happens in either case. Even in his world, if there is a delay on an outcome of an election, which might happen for a long time because people are going to be recounting these votes over and over again, you're doing it on a national scale. Not to mention, he was talking about recounts. Those are going to become even more common, which means the timeline stretches out further in his world. He's actually creating further national security problems than I am in my world. Now, he also talks about countering the popular vote and how there can be differences between the two. I think that this is a decent point, but it misses why that's important. There's no reason why the electoral system functionally doesn't represent the actual public just because it doesn't represent the popular vote. If it represents the popular vote, then it's largely representing the major population centers and not representing the minorities of the public and everything like that. He also gives this 23% quote that you only have to win 23% of the public. I actually have a breakdown of that that's a little more detailed. We've shown here that it's theoretically possible to win with 22% of the popular vote. Such an outcome, however, requires a 50-point difference between the victor's vote share in his win states and his loss states. When we restricted that difference to a historically large margin of 15 points, the popular vote requirement for victory jumped to 43%. When we took account of the party loyalties of various states, the requirement grew to 45%. And when we further insisted that the winners' ranked vote shares vary only gradually, the minimum price of victory approached 49% of the national popular vote. So his understanding of what can actually happen in my world is functionally false. He's not representing what's actually going on with those numbers. Now, he also has a couple of responses from this one, including the importance of having runoff elections. He doesn't actually give reasons why that's beneficial beyond saying it produces a majority? Well, initially, he's basically allowing everything to be based on pluralities, which is actually a lot worse because it leads to more likelihood of voter fraud, because the numbers can be even lower and still reach that threshold. But it also depresses voter turnout because people don't go to runoff elections nearly as often as they go to the main election, which means the actual number of people voting will go down in his world, despite the fact that he's giving them more, in his idea, more representation. A squeaky close race in a single state is more likely than a squeaky close state in a national popular election. That much is true. But the greater point is that both types of problem are very unlikely, though both are possible. So the tiny absolute difference in the probability is outweighed by the far more catastrophic effects that would occur if we were confronted by a Florida-type conflict in which the whole country is up for grabs. That's what he fundamentally doesn't understand. There's this huge loss as soon as you get to a tie system with the national popular vote, which you do not encounter with individual states. He damages the national voting system in a way that my system cannot possibly do. And so I urge a vote for Comp.
Thank you. How much prep time do I have? Christopher, you're on mute.
Oh, got. All right, I'm back. You got the minute break, and then you got the 2 minutes left of prep from where you took 2 minutes of prep earlier.
All right, I'll take the
All
full
right.
prep time.
All right, you got a minute left.
Thank you. How much time do I have left, Christopher?
5 seconds.
All right, great. Then I'll just get started. Thank you, Dr. Pollock, for this debate, and thank you, Christopher, for being so willing to moderate. You've done a great job moderating, Christopher. And I'm just going to reiterate my case. that the that the value that I'm presenting is democracy, and the criteria is equal suffrage of the citizens. I have pointed out in my opening speech that the Electoral College, one of the problems that it has is that it undermines democracy by suppressing the voter turnout. If Marc Pollock seems to be worried about a state like California and New York and all hogging up all the votes, well, those states make up less than 2% of the entire popular vote. And California is like, I think, 0.14% of the entire popular vote electorate. If you're focusing on 0.2% of the electorate, you're going to lose the election. And Joe Biden's, let me just pull up my sheet real quick. Pull up my quick data real quick. So yeah, in California, California was 0.11% of the entire electorate, and of that 0.1%, Joe Biden, only 0.14% of Joe Biden's electoral vote came from California, and 0.06% of his vote came from New York. So again, if Joe Biden were to be focusing only on California and New York, he would have lost the election by a landslide. Because, and again, in 2016, the swing states had a significantly higher voter turnout than the quote unquote safe states. And if he's worried about the issues of the tyranny of the majority, and he's worried about and making sure everyone has equal access to the presidency and elected officials being interested in, that the Electoral College does just, getting rid of the Electoral College will do just that. It would require candidates to visit the states that are being heard. If I'm a Democrat running for president, I'm going to have to reach out to rural voters in West Virginia. I want to reach out to voters in Texas, Alabama, Kansas, North Dakota. And a lot of these people simply do not vote because their vote simply does not count. And this point was completely dropped. So please extend this points across the board. Next, I spoke about the rise of numerous. He spoke about the rise of numerous fractional parties in runoff elections. I pointed out those were a good thing because it requires the winner to have a majority of the votes. Now, Dr. Pollock simply hands-waves this away, but the point remains that it is a good thing to require the president to have a solid 50% of the electorate. Finally, national being more susceptible to fraud. Again, if there was fraud in the 2000 election, only a handful, 100 votes or so, a couple hundred votes in Florida completely changed the amount of the election. If in order to change,
just letting you know, you should wrap up this point because that was 3 minutes.
Okay, so yeah, if the voter fraud, you would need over 500,000 fraudulent votes to change the outcome of the popular votes in 2011. So I yield the mic. So thank you so much for this debate. Any any final remarks? As Dr. Pollock, you were playing. It's interesting, Dr. Pollock, you were playing devil's advocate in this debate.
Yes. I definitely have some responses to myself where I did actually have a counter advocacy I was considering running, but I decided to throw it out at the last second. The argument about the argument I was making regarding the use of the Electoral College to better represent minority rights, I definitely could have done a better job explaining that. But there's, as you put it, there's a bit of this balancing act going on there. I think it's harder to counter the argument about just logistical problems that can come up with a nationwide election where essentially the borders of each state don't really matter quite so much. And you end up dealing with a lot of other issues when it comes to close elections, because imagine if the response to this election was, it's too close, we need to recount every single ballot. that we wouldn't have a system in place to do that. It's
Right.
it's incredibly difficult to manage.
Yeah, I think I should have put it in my opening speech and during my plan that there would be an instant runoff election, and I don't think I had a good response to the entire thing about all the having to recount every single vote in all the states. So yeah, I think this was an overall a fantastic debate.
Yeah.
Christopher, any thoughts?
I think my only real thought about it, because I'm going into this with like just my background knowledge, but I think regarding the point that the Electoral College protects minority rights, even though I would agree with that, I think maybe a good way to respond to it would have been to simply point out that a lot of minorities that live in population centers, that are rather large. There's lots of pockets of minorities in big cities like Detroit and Chicago, and most of those minorities, their views align with the views of the majority. So it's you could definitely make the theoretical argument that the Electoral College has like a tangible effect of protecting minorities, but I don't think like in a practical basis we've seen that. So that's really the big response that was in my head listening to that.
Yeah.
And there's also the idea that the point kind of assumes that minorities all vote the same. I think mostly the Electoral College protects ideological minorities. I don't think necessarily protects racial or I guess
Right.
other identities as much.
And I suppose the big response I'd give to myself on that is it's an outdated view of
Right.
how things work.
Right.
It's there's this understanding from a theoretical perspective that so there are some minorities in some states that don't get listened to as much. Just like but there are also minorities in other states that don't get listened to. It's a matter of finding the best location that best represents them, and honestly, either way, you're probably going to fail.
Yep. And if you enjoyed this Lincoln Douglas format, we have a lot more debates like this coming up. We're actually hosting a Lincoln Douglas tournament. So if you're interested in signing up to this debate tournament, please go to debateart.com and join today. And I'm going to put the link to the tournament sign-up sheet and the sidebar chats. Let me pull this up real quick. So there is the link to join to learn more about this debate tournament, and there is also going to be some public policy debates, policy forum debates, and some other formats that we're going to be trying out. So many of these topics will be coming from speechanddebate.org and other national debate leagues. So if you enjoy these types of debates, please hit that subscribe button, hit that bell notification, and join debateart.com today. Thank you very much. And with that, if you guys have any last thoughts, I will end the broadcast.
Well, it was a good debate, and I definitely will have to think on it a little bit as to who won that. And I apologize for losing track of time and places. I'm sorry. I get sucked into the debate, and I just kind of forget to press the start time button. So there's that. But I think it went pretty well. That's all I got to say.
All right. Excellent. Well, thank you very much, everyone. Have a wonderful day.